What's going on, everyone? I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle alongside our new X's and O's analyst, this time for men's basketball. This is former Texas A&M guard Mark French. Mark, how's it going, man?
Hey, Travis. Doing well, doing well. Happy to be here. This should be fun.
Yeah, as readers and viewers have known, we talked to Jay Arnold, breaking down a little bit of the X's and O's, a little bit of what it's like to be a college athlete at Texas A&M with Jay Arnold through the football season. We're going to do a little bit of the same thing with Mark French. Of course, Mark was a guard for the Aggies in Jimbo Fisher's first season in Aggie land. He also does some color commentary at times for SEC Network and 12th Man Productions when called upon that. Mark, give a little bit more of your background, how you got to A&M, your time at A&M, and then what you're doing nowadays with that fancy background behind you.
Yeah, no, Travis. So yeah, it's great to be here. I didn't grow up in Aggie. I didn't even grow up in Texas. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and so A&M. I knew what Texas A&M was, but I really high school. My family actually moved here to Texas, and I ended up. I was getting recruited by some smaller schools, some Ivy Leagues. Some schools on the West Coast, and just kind of how things shook out. I had an injury right before senior year and kind of fell through the cracks a little bit, and ended up deciding to walk on at A&M. And my AU coach at the time, here in Dallas, was really good friends with Coach Kennedy. And things got a good senior year in high school, and that kind of parlayed into that opportunity at A&M. And so I spent 3 years under Billy Kennedy. First year didn't play much. Junior year ended up getting put on scholarship. And by the end of the year, I think the last game of the year, I made my first career start in the SEC tournament in Nashville. Right after that game, really before that game, I knew Coach Kennedy was going to be let go. Anyways, that was frustrating for me, right? I climbed the whole ladder, kind of, in the last game, finally made a start and was in the mix, and then coaches let go, right? And I'm back at square one. And so Buzz came in, actually took me off scholarship, and then I ended up earning it back about halfway through the year, as I started, I don't know, like 8 to 10 games there at the beginning, and so got to see that whole coaching transition happen, and hopefully be at the time a senior voice for the team of leadership. And so got hurt about halfway through conference, and so I had to do rehab night, but anyway, I'm so in the system and the people, and yeah, I'm just excited to talk ball with you each week. This should be fun. So
yeah, for sure. And how have you enjoyed doing a little bit of the television color commentary? Because I know fans will be able to see you on there a couple of those non-conference games early in the past 2 seasons.
I had some people within the basketball administration reach out, and SEC Network sometimes needs help with those games that are before conference play. And so I just water a little bit, right? It's a different thing where you're sitting courtside, you're analyzing it, you're on air, you got people talking in your ear, and so there's an art to it. But it's been really fun to just be back after a couple of years of being away, kind of be back in the mix, and that's been really fun. I've enjoyed that for sure.
So that, as we talked about before we got started here, that is the beautiful skyline of my hometown, Dallas, behind you. What are you doing nowadays?
Yes, I'm working in private wealth. My dad heads up a team here at Steeple Nicholas is the name of our firm, and so we work with a lot of corporate executives. My niche is in the energy space, so I'm just calling on, setting up meetings, all sorts of things like that, and some investment banking stuff. And that's kind of the space I operate in within our team. Is just all the business development for the oil and gas executives.
Great. Okay, so now let's get into that basketball. Texas A&M off to a so-so start this year. Their first net ranking was 120th, which is a lower than anybody would have liked to see. 3 losses so far in the season. Let's start with offense. What have you seen so far from the A&M's offense this year? It's different than in the years past with kind of the roster and the talent that they have. but it's been a little bit hit or miss. What have you liked or not liked about it so far?
Yeah, I think you said it's been hit or miss, right? On the nights when it's on, they can score over 100 like they have once this year, or it can look really sloppy like it did this past Saturday in Fort Worth, right? And so, to me, I mean, as teams start scouting and players get scouted more throughout the year, you got to have variations to your offense. I think one of the biggest things that I would love to see develop just as a fan is offensive identity. What is Texas A&M known as, right? If it's like Arkansas, we're going to get up and down the floor. Villanova, swing ball, that kind of just developing an offensive identity, and always talk about, can we create basketball poetry? And a lot of times when I watch the Aggies, it's just this one-on-one, break a guy down off the dribble. All the other four guys are looking at the ball handler. And what I'd love to see is more ball movement and create that poetry where the ball is swinging around the arc. There's a drive, there's a pass to the corner, there's a one more. That beautiful basketball that we all love to watch. I'd love to see a little bit more of that. But I mean, right now, Travis, we're 245th in assists, so we have 112 assists on the season. Definitely, would need to rise. That's a sign that we're not sharing the ball, right? Or we don't have that continuity yet. A lot of transfers, they're kind of figuring each other out, figuring out the rotation as well as just played around with the rotation a little bit. But then at the end of the day, you also got to be able to shoot the ball. Basketball is about putting the ball in the hole, and I think we're 32% from three. That's 257th in the country. We're 52% from twos, which is 161st in the country, and we only have, let's see here, 461 field goal attempts on the year, which is 323rd in the country. So that tells me we're playing at a slower pace, but we're also not making shots at a high rate. So it really needs to be one or the other. We're going to play at a slower pace, but we're going to be really efficient. We're going to shoot high percentage shots and knock down the threes when we have them. Or we're going to play fast. We're going to have more attempts, and maybe our percentage is a little bit lower. Overall, I think my assessment is I'd love to just see the Aggies really develop an identity, an offensive identity that's part of their core beliefs they're going to have going forward. And I know some assistant coaching changes have kind of affected the offense the last couple of years, but there's way too much talent to have that assist number so I think they'll turn it around now.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those numbers in today's basketball. A lot of talk around how the high percentage shots are layups, close twos, and 3-point line, because you can take a lot of consistent shots from back there. As you mentioned, A&M not so great from behind the 3-point line. Bart Tovark on his website also doesn't have them very good on those close twos, in the 60% range. On those close twos, you got to be a little bit more efficient if you're going to play slow, like you said. That being said, is this team, been watching especially that Boise State game, is this team a little too reliant on the 3-pointer?
Yeah, I mean, I think at times, I mean, only too reliant if you're not hitting it. So if we could hit some more shots, it'd be nice. And we have guys that have shown that they can hit, right? And Hefner's, I guess he's been out a little bit, but Wade, obviously, Tyrese historically has been a good 3-point shooter. But really, just like in today's modern game, Travis, it's all about spacing. If we're having 4, preferably 5 guys who can shoot the 3, what does it do? It opens up the lane to drive, and like you said, it's those close twos, and that 60% number on close twos. I'd really love to see that around 75%. Those are the bunny layups we call, the floaters, the up and unders. I think 75% probably, or even higher, is a mark of a really good team in that regard. And the point percentage, I'd love to see it jump. What are we at, 32% right now? Even if we got it into that 35 to 38 range, I think you could see it translate to a couple more wins. But the reality is right now we're struggling to shoot. And so I don't know whether that's a system issue, a player's issue, but it's something that's kind of plagued us a little bit on and off for a couple of years now. But like I said, it's talent that it gets you hopeful. If they get hot like they did towards the end of last year, when they should have been a tournament team, in my opinion, had the capability to be a Sweet 16 team, they were hitting those shots. And anyways, I think they'll be all right. But again, modern basketball, you got to be able to finish around the basket, and you got to be able to space the floor. And they're struggling to do a little bit of both of those.
So one of the guys that I think has been trending a little bit better in the last couple of games, a newcomer, Julius Marble, transfer from Michigan State. What have you seen from him so far, and how having two big body guys has helped the Aggies a little bit?
Well, I think just his mature presence, right? One of Buzz's favorite quotes, we all know he loves quotes and things like that, right? It's a race to maturity. So when you think about that, Travis, in today's transfer portal world and immediate gratification world, sometimes it's hard to have a mature team. And I think Marble really kind of brings that. He played for Izzo, one of my all-time favorite coaches, right, at Michigan State. And he's been through the ringer a little bit. Dallas kid that went up there. I think he's a junior. So he's kind of been around the block, but it's not just that he's been around a little while, it's that his game is mature, if that makes sense. The way in which he plays, he understands rotation, especially on defense, which is important. But he also understands where the extra pass needs to be made, when it's time, in the game, if we're struggling to get a layup or we're struggling to find, score the ball, sometimes he'll just go and just pound one right into the paint and try to get an easy one to kind of soothe everybody down. And so I just think his maturity is going to be something they're going to have to lean on, because there is a lot of youth still on this team, even though we know they return a lot, but it's still a young team relative to some of the people they're facing. For instance, Boise State the other night was a very mature team. And so I just think there's a piece, you'll hear Buzz talk about this, a piece that kind of comes when Marble is in the game. And it just kind of, everyone kind of settles into their role. And him and Coleman figuring out how to play together might be the key to the Ag's entire season. I could be wrong, but I think those are two of your best five. And so figuring out a way for them to coexist, I think it's going to be of the utmost importance.
Sure. So let's shift over to the defensive side of the ball. Buzz Williams, of course, kind of a defense first coach, a unique defense. They want to force other teams' players to shoot the three ball, but as has been in the past, but especially this season, teams have been killing A&M from behind the 3-point line. What have you seen on defense, and why are they having so much trouble defending the three?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Travis, so I think we're allowing, let's see here, 71 points a game. I'd like to see that in the mid 60s. That'll come down as conference play starts and teams, like I said, start scouting each other. For me, I'm looking at fouls, and I think we're just fouling too much. I think we foul in the upper half of the country. We foul at a very high rate, and so what that does, that means that teams are getting into the bonus early in half, right? Which allows them to get a lot of 1-on-1 and then eventually 2 free throw opportunities. And then on top of that, think about psychologically what that does, Travis. So when you're in the bonus, you're not going to play defense as aggressively, right? And a hallmark of a Buzz Williams team is an aggressive defense. Think, when they're coming off pick and rolls, we're going to trap. When the ball goes to the post, a lot of times you're going to see a trap and a rotation. That's how Q got all those steals last year. It was just a trap. He would play the passing lane. That's where you see him get all those ESPN dunks. But just coming off of that premise of we're going to be aggressive. And I think one thing that happens when you foul too much is you're living in the bonus, and it takes away some of that aggressiveness that is really core to the identity of A&M, not just on the defensive end, but that rubs off on the offensive end, right? And so they got to learn to start playing without fouling. And then on the flip side, what do you want to do? On offensively, you want to be aggressive and get into the bonus before the other team. And so I think that for me, more than, maybe even more than the 3-point percentage being allowed is going to be is how they learn to play without fouling.
For sure. When you look at defending 3-pointers, what is as a player, what is the kind of go-to mantra of making sure that you can prevent a guy from getting a contested three? What do you do as a defender to make sure that they got a hand in their face, especially when you're in rotation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's doing your work beforehand, right? If you're in rotation, you're inherently already behind, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think some of that is dictating to the offense what you're going to allow them to have. And one thing I'm seeing from the Aggies a lot is this: one, they're jumping on every closeout, which I'm fine with. That shows effort. But a lot of times we're jumping, we're taking ourselves out of the play. And so instead of there's a shot being put up, right? instead of going straight up and trying to contest, we're flying by. Well, what's that doing? A lot of times the opposing offense is just pump faking. They're driving in the lane. Now what happens? They're playing 5-on-4, and now they're spraying it out to the wing or to the opposite corner, and they're getting wide open threes. And so I think, for me, it comes back to discipline and daily habits defensively. They got to be more solid. I feel like sometimes we're chicken with our heads cut off a little bit, and some of that's good. And I think some of that is how the staff wants to play, and it's why they were so successful down the stretch last year. And even my senior year, that's how we kind of played, is this reckless abandon, just overwhelming energy, right? On a night-to-night basis, sometimes that energy is hard to cultivate because it's not the end of the season. You're not playing with your season on the line. And so I think overall, I just like to see them be a little bit more solid, just in defensive principles, but also probably more so in defensive execution and discipline, doing those easy things instead of flying by the guy, make a hard contest, stay in front. But yeah, that's how I'd answer that question.
So when you look back as these first 9 games as a whole,
Yeah.
they have 3 losses against pretty decent teams. Compared to where they've been at this point, the last 4 seasons or 3 seasons of Buzz Williams' tenure, do you feel like they're even though you don't like those losses, do you feel like they're ahead of where they've been at this point in seasons past? Because to me, it feels like that a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think Saturday was a step back, if I were to be truthful. I was there in Fort Worth. I didn't really like the vibe, if I were to be honest. And I think the staff and the players would say the same thing, right? I think they're ahead of schedule in some regards and behind in others. And I think, like I said, transfer portal, young team, they're going to be growing pains. But at some point, they got to get some tread on the tires and get rolling, right? Because we saw last year, these early season games matter so much. You drop one to Boise State, and it's not just that they're dropping them, it's the manner in which you lose. You lose by 28 to Colorado, 15 to Boise State. And you look at other teams around the region, and, as a fan that wants to see us go to a Final Four more than anyone, it's time for us to start winning those games. And I think we're really close to doing so and breaking through. But these next 2, Oregon State and Memphis, are going to be pivotal come March. I mean, the selection committee, you saw what they did last year. If you don't have marquee out of conference wins, it makes it really hard, no matter how good you do in conference, no matter if you make a run deep into the SEC tournament. A lot of this stuff is decided right now, and there's got to be a sense of urgency. And, the one thing I think is important for fans to realize is how hard Buzz's preseason regiment is. And a lot of times, in my opinion, and I've talked with guys from Virginia Tech and Marquette, where he was at previously, they don't get their legs back till after Christmas. And I know that sounds foreign to some people who haven't played college athletics, but when you go through a 2-month grind like Buzz puts you through, it takes it out of you. You got guys with shin splints and all sorts of stuff. And it's great because at the end of the season, you've been through so much together that it kind of culminates, and you see these amazing close-knit teams that are able to beat anyone like we saw last year, right? But the downside of that sometimes is on this front half of the year. You got to navigate the schedule in a way that positions you come March to be able to be hitting your hot streak and not have those bad losses preventing you from a higher seed. And so I think that's one nugget just to kind of earmark away. A lot of times, if you go look at Buzz's career, go look at the record before Christmas and then after Christmas, it's almost always night and day.
It's a great point. And you mentioned there are 2, Oregon State, Memphis coming up. Memphis is the hallmark, like the one to earmark on that. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but it's all about getting those quad 1 wins. A&M strength of schedule in the early part of this non-conference season has been exponentially better than it was last season, but they're on a little bit more of a build where their first quad 1 matchup should be that one at Memphis. Last year they had 16 quad 1 games. 3 of those were in the SEC tournament and didn't really matter to the selection committee because it was so late in the season. So they have a chance to capitalize after getting a little bit of a build. How important do you think it is having 9 games, actually 10 games under their belt before they hit that first quad 1 test and then head into conference play where they'll have 11 quad 1 potentially matchups?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I also think a lot of it just depends on how you're playing at that point in time, right, Travis? And you know, I hate that we couldn't get that Boise State one because that would have given us 4 in a row heading into Oregon State. I feel like we maybe get that one. I think that's an ESPN2 national televised game, and then you roll that into Memphis. You got 5 in a row headed into Memphis, and the game in Fort Worth kind of makes me kind of step back and reassess. If I were to be take my maroon Kool-Aid glasses off and analyze it, it makes me a little skeptical. Now I'm hopeful because they have the talent to compete with anybody. But we do have to put it together, and it has to happen now. I'm looking at it. I went through and looked at the SEC schedule, and even with a very good showing, say you were to win 65% of your games in conference, you almost have to have these next 2 if you want to not be on that, last 4 in type discussion. And so I hope they're practicing with urgency. But yeah, the schedule's a little bit better this year. I still think, to some degree, these Thanksgiving tournaments, you don't have power over who's going to be playing in those. Also look around the country. I see Texas playing in all these marquee games, Illinois, Gonzaga, a raucous home crowd. And, y'all know I love the A&M staff. I think they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal people. They've been amazing to me. But just like as a whole, across the athletic department, let's schedule these instead of neutral site games. Let's get these big home and homes going. It'd be so fun. I think my senior year we played Gonzaga at home, packed house, right? Why didn't Duke come to College Station? Why doesn't Kansas do it? Why don't we do a home and home with Kansas? And I think that's kind of the next evolution for A&M hoops is to start getting into that national discussion more. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. I think a new arena in the next 5 years is something that plays into it. Smaller, intimate space. Think Auburn, Ole Miss. Students on the baseline. Make it an experience, an environment that's hard to come play in. As opposed, sometimes I feel like we're in this massive arena and it's halfway full, and we don't have these marquee matchups. So I think on a going forward basis, I'd love to see some of those blue blood schools. Let's go do home and home with them. I'm not a huge fan of neutral site games. It used to bug me as a player, unless we're playing in an NBA arena, which is always kind of cool. But overall, I mean, you got the SMU win, right? You went to Chicago, beat DePaul, and then you have 3, Loyola Chicago, Abilene Christian, Louisiana Monroe. You lost to Murray State by 11, Colorado by 28, Boise State by 15. The Boise State one's the one that causes a red flag. They could sue that if you beat Oregon and Memphis. But, I mean, I don't really see a world in which they're going to be a top 6, 7 seed. I think they're probably looking, in that 8 to 10 range, if I were to guess, with a strong SEC, slate and showing.
Sure. Well, my last question was let's start off the season with a little bit of prediction of what you think the ceiling of this team is, but you kind of nailed it right there. We'll put it like this: as it stands right now, as it sits, and we can vacillate on this through the season. Is this an NCAA tournament team?
As of right now, no.
Okay.
Does not mean they can't become one. What I watched Saturday night in Fort Worth live in person was not a tournament team by any stretch of the imagination. Now you look at the roster and I go, holy cow, if Wade plays like he's supposed to and Tyrese gets to his late season form from last year, we figure out the Marble Coleman combo, and then you mix in Dennis, Manny, Hef, and then Solo is the most talented kid on the roster. I don't care what anyone says. I went and watched a shoot around. I've been at multiple games. Solomon Washington is probably just raw talent, the most talented guy they got on the entire roster. And so integrating him into the mix is going to be pivotal. They got the talent. It's just about putting the puzzle together, right? And so if I had to guess, I think I do think they'll turn it around. I think in that 8 to 12 range come, tournament time is realistic, and it should be attainable, right? So I'm rooting for him more than anybody. So we'll see what happens, right, Travis?
Yeah, we'll take a heat check throughout the season a couple times to kind of see where the team is, in our opinion, in regards to the NCAA tournament. Because after that NCAA finals, NIT finals appearance last year, you got to think the next progression would be the NCAA tournament for the Aggies. Mark, I enjoyed it, man. I'm excited to do this. as many weeks as we can throughout the basketball season. I know you're a busy man in your fancy suit, as I'm looking like a scrub over here. So we'll
Oh,
get to
no.
these as many times as we can through the season, and appreciate you jumping on to talk some Aggie hoops with me.